The Murder of Charlie Kirk, a story of influence and loss. Chapter 1. Mourning at UVU, Hope, Fear, and the Unthinkable. The September sun rose warmly over Utah Valley University on that fateful morning, illuminating a canvas of pale gold sky that seemed to promise nothing but an ordinary day. At the heart of campus, a large white tent had been erected on the lawn, its fabric billowing slightly in the gentle breeze. Underneath, students, young activists, and curious supporters gathered by the hundreds, some clutching signs, others recording on their phones, drawn by the magnetic pull of Charlie Kirk. The crowd whispered and joked, but beneath the excitement was a current of seriousness. This was not just a rally, but a moment in time, a call to purpose. Charlie Kirk arrived shortly before noon, stepping onto the stage with his usual assurance. He wore a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled, the posture of a man deeply comfortable in front of a crowd, yet fully aware of what he represented. As he lifted his hand in greeting, the applause rose, a warm wave of cheers and claps greeting him. For many in the crowd, students, young conservatives, and seasoned activists alike, Kirk was more than a speaker. He was a mentor, a provocateur, and a guiding force behind a generation of conservative engagement. He began with a familiar cadence, strong but measured. "We are here today," he said, voice steady over the microphone, "because ideas matter. Your voice matters. And if we want to build something real, something lasting, we must be present. We must speak. We must stand." His rhetoric wove between earnest conviction and light humor, recalling his early days around Turning Point, USA, recounting how he and co-founder Bill Montgomery started with a handful of campus activists and a dream to reshape youth engagement in American politics. As he spoke, he paused occasionally to scan the sea of faces in front of him. There were students who had traveled for hours, TPUSA chapter, presidents clutching notebooks with his quotes, and media crews broadcasting to a wider online audience. The sky seemed to lean in, as if listening. Charlie invoked themes of personal responsibility, free speech, and the idea that political involvement was not only a privilege, but a moral duty. "This country is ours to remake," he told them, "and not just for the now, but for the next generation." Cheers erupted at that, and he smiled, heartened by their energy. Behind the scenes, though, a darker story was unraveling. High above the tent, on the rooftop of a nearby building, Tyler James Robinson, age 22, had positioned himself. According to court filings, he had planned the moment for days. He studied Kirk's itinerary, tracked security patterns, and procured a .30-06 bolt-action rifle, a serious, powerful weapon. It was not a careless act, but a calculated move. Documents later revealed by prosecutors would detail not only his preparation, but his inner turmoil. In text to his roommate, who was also his romantic partner, he allegedly confessed his intent. "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it," he wrote. Back on stage, Charlie continued. He spoke of legacy, how every one of the young people before him had the chance to forge something new, better than what had come before. He invited questions, challenged critics, and urged listeners to take action, whether on campus, in their communities, or through political engagement. At that moment, he was not just a speaker. He was a symbol of hope for many, a living testament to the power of conviction and youth-led change. But as he delivered his message, The calm of the afternoon shattered. A single gunshot rang out, sharp and final, a sound that cut through the applause, the chanting, and the swirl of conversation. Pandemonium erupted. Students ducked, chairs overturned, phones dropped. The cheers turned to screams, and people scrambled to move away from the stage, some as quickly as they could, others frozen in shock. Charlie fell. He clutched his neck, his face contorted in surprise and pain. Those near the front rushed forward, helping him as security scrambled to shield others. Medical personnel, already on site for the event, responded immediately, weaving through the chaos. The tent, once a place of hope and discourse, became a scene of terror. On the rooftop, Robinson's plan reached its devastating conclusion. According to the prosecutor's account, he dropped the rifle, changed his clothes, and attempted to hide evidence. He allegedly told his partner to delete text messages. He knew what he had done was irreversible. Back below, first responders reached Charlie and carried him from the stage. The crowd parted like red sea waters, allowing paramedics to do their work. He was stretchered away, and the rally that had promised unity and purpose collapsed into grief and confusion. As helicopters circled overhead, cameras flashed, and bystanders cried. The sense of a national nightmare began to settle in. Later that afternoon, news broke. Charlie Kirk was pronounced dead. The political world recoiled. For his supporters, the loss was deeply personal. For his critics, it was a moment that exposed the raw, dangerous potential of ideological conflict. Turning Point USA, the movement he had built, was left in mourning. The American Comeback Tour, which was meant to energize conservative youth, became a ledger of loss. Law enforcement acted with speed. Surveillance footage, eyewitness reports, and roofline images were analyzed. Within days, Tyler Robinson was identified as the suspect. The Utah County Attorney, Jeff Gray, announced 7 charges: aggravated murder, discharge of a firearm, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and violent offense in the presence of a child. Prosecutors also declared their intent to seek the death penalty, citing the chilling nature of the crime and its political overtones. Court documents later revealed even more. According to an affidavit, Robinson's partner found a hidden note underneath his keyboard reading, "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm gonna take it." Text message transcripts allegedly include his words of remorse and radical justification. Some hate can't be negotiated out. Investigators tied his DNA to the rifle, a match found on the trigger, on spent and unspent cartridges, and even on a towel used to wrap the rifle. There was also evidence suggesting deep ideological motivation. Court filings and statements from Robinson's mother indicate he had become politically active and leaned more to the left in the months before the shooting, particularly shifting in his views toward LGBTQ+ rights. His romantic partner, who lives with him, is transgender and, according to prosecutors, cooperated in the investigation. In his first court appearance via video from jail, Robinson remained stoic. He did not enter a plea, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Meanwhile, Charlie's widow, Erica Kirk, was granted a protective order, barring Robinson from contacting her as the case moved forward. The legal stakes could not have been clearer. Utah prosecutors made it known they would pursue capital punishment. Across the country, reactions were swift and intense. Political commentators, media outlets, and ordinary citizens all began to grapple with the implications. Some framed the tragedy as a terrifying symptom of rising political violence, pointing to polarized rhetoric and ideological extremism. Others defended Kirk's legacy, remembering him as a principled activist whose life was dedicated to empowering young people. In conservative circles, the phrase American tragedy was used repeatedly and not hyperbolically. In the days that followed, memorial services were organized. Videos of Charlie's speeches circulated more widely than ever. His most resonant lines were replayed on social media. His influence, tragically, felt more potent in death than in life. Turning Point USA announced solemn gatherings to honor him, and the movement he built declared that his legacy would endure. But behind the public mourning, the investigation raged on. Law enforcement agencies, including state authorities and the FBI, dissected the available evidence: the rooftop vantage point, the ballistic analysis, the text messages, the family interviews. In his quiet room, far from the noise, Tyler Robinson's mind was the focus of scrutiny. Experts analyzed his political beliefs, his mental state, and the path that led him to violence. The first chapter of this story of hope, influence, and loss had closed with a gunshot. The second chapter, as many realized, would be just as complicated and far-reaching. Charlie Kirk's life had ended in tragedy, but Robinson's life, now in the hands of the justice system, would open a new era in America's reckoning with ideology, extremism, and the cost of political conviction. Chapter 2. From teen firebrand to a movement. Charlie Kirk was born on October 14, 1993, in Arlington Heights, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, into a household that combined stability, ambition, and faith. His father, Robert Kirk, was an architect. His mother, Kimberly, worked as a mental health counselor. As a boy, Charlie displayed an early restlessness, not of discontent, but of purpose. He joined the Boy Scouts, eventually earning the rank of Eagle Scout, and even volunteered in politics, helping out in the 2010 U.S. Senate campaign of Mark Kirk. No relation. In high school, his mind turned to ideas. He noticed what he perceived as a liberal tilt in his textbooks, and, writing with surprising boldness for a teenager, he penned an op-ed for Breitbart News, decrying the influence of liberal economists like Paul Krugman. That piece, surprising in its clarity and conviction, caught the attention of national media, and soon after, a young Kirk made his first appearance on Fox Business. At just 18 years old, Kirk stood at a crossroad. He briefly attended Harper College in Illinois, but it was clear that his path lay elsewhere. In 2012, his vision crystallized. While speaking at Benedictine University's Youth Government Day, he met Bill Montgomery, a retired Tea Party-aligned entrepreneur. Montgomery saw in Kirk not just youthful zeal, but the raw potential of a movement. He encouraged Kirk to skip college and devote himself to activism full-time. Together, Kirk and Montgomery founded Turning Point USA in May 2012. TPUSA's stated mission was to identify, educate, train, and organize students around conservative principles: free markets, limited government, and fiscal responsibility. What began as a small student outreach effort grew rapidly. At the 2012 Republican National Convention, Kirk famously pitched his vision to Foster Friess, a wealthy, conservative donor who provided early funding that helped TPUSA take off. From those early days, Kirk was not content with incremental growth. He traveled relentlessly to high schools, college campuses, speaking events, and conferences. He personally helped recruit chapter leaders, scouted strategic campuses, and mentored students who were often inexperienced but determined. TPUSA, under his leadership, did not just become a youth organization. It became a political force. One of Kirk's most controversial and defining initiatives was the Professor Watch List, a project aimed at exposing college professors whose teachings he and his organization believed were ideologically biased against conservative studies. The Watch List was harsh criticism, divisive, and an attack on academic freedom. Yet, for many of his followers, it symbolized TPUSA's willingness to challenge what they saw as entrenched liberal orthodoxy in higher education. Kirk's influence only grew as he expanded into media. He launched The Charlie Kirk Show, a daily talk radio and podcast program that allowed him to amplify his message far beyond lecture halls. Through his podcast and social media, he reached hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of young conservatives. He also authored books. Titles such as Campus Battlefield and The MAGA Doctrine reflected his philosophy and ambition. Despite never holding elected office, Kirk became a central figure in conservative politics. He frequently appeared on TV, debated political opponents, and was very visible within Republican circles. His mix of populism, Christian nationalism, and youth-oriented activism earned him praise from many, but also The Guardian described him as a showman, rich in the political currents of his era. By his late 20s, Kirk had built not just a movement, but a network. Turning Point USA chapters numbered in the thousands, spread across high schools and colleges. His influence was so potent that he was often described as a youth whisperer for the right, someone who understood and mobilized Gen Z conservatism in a way few others could. But ambition and visibility brought their challenges. Kirk's work was never safe or uncontroversial. He also courted media firestorms. Critics accused him of amplifying conspiracy theories, spreading misinformation, and promoting a style of politics that stoked division. He leaned into culture war battles on transgender rights, academic freedom, and race that galvanized supporters while alienating detractors. This polarization would become one of the defining tensions of his public life. Amid all this, somewhere far removed from the spotlight, Tyler James Robinson's life was quietly changing course. According to court filings, Robinson's political identity had shifted dramatically in the months leading up to the shooting. His mother told investigators that he was becoming more politically active and leaned more to the left, particularly in his views on LGBTQ+ rights. His roommate, with whom he was romantically involved, was reportedly transgender, and their relationship appears repeatedly in prosecutors' descriptions of Robinson's mindset. In texts recovered by investigators, Robinson allegedly expressed that his motivation was not only personal, but ideological. He wrote to his partner, "I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out." This, combined with his detailed planning, suggests a disturbing fusion of political grievance and deeply personal emotion. As Kirk's influence solidified, platforms, summits, media reach, so did Robinson's obsession. He tracked Kirk's public appearances and began to conceive of a moment where his personal anger could intersect with political symbolism. The two men, though worlds apart in lifestyle and vision, were on a collision course long before the day of the shooting. By 2024 and early 2025, Charlie Kirk was more than an activist. He was a cultural institution. TPUSA's events were broadcast, live-streamed, and heavily attended. His students and followers saw him as not only a leader, but a mentor, and in many ways, a spiritual guide for conservative youth. He preached not only free markets and limited government, but also faith, responsibility, and the significance of believing in America as an idea worth defending. Yet, even as his public persona soared, critics remained vocal. For some, his brand of activism represented a dangerous blend of political conservatism with evangelical fervor. For others, his provocations on social issues felt like weaponized culture war rhetoric, an intentional provocation rather than just political argument. Throughout it all, Kirk maintained a sense of personal mission. He believed deeply in the power of youth. He often said that his generation might either be the most disengaged or the most transformative, and his life's work was to ensure it was the latter. Whether speaking at a small college debate or organizing a national summit, he remained relentlessly focused. In the months before his final event, Kirk's schedule became more grueling than ever. His American Comeback Tour took him to college campuses across the country under the banner Prove Me Wrong, where he invited students to challenge him directly on issues. In interviews, he reflected on his journey, from a teenager writing op-eds to a national voice, from a small non-profit to a movement that many of his peers said had fundamentally reshaped conservative politics. And Robinson, in parallel, seemed to spiral inward. His political beliefs merged with deeply personal pain. His planning became more concrete, and his resentment more focused. Court documents later painted a picture of a man who believed that Kirk's ideas were not just wrong, but dangerous, and who felt compelled to act. The story of Charlie Kirk's rise was not simply the story of a young conservative activist growing into power. It was the story of a man who believed that ideas would change the world, that a generation could be mobilized not just to vote, but to think, debate, and lead. The final year, momentum and shadows. By the spring of 2025, Charlie Kirk's schedule had reached an almost impossible pace. From the moment dawn broke until late into the night, he was speaking at events, mentoring student leaders, recording podcasts, preparing for television appearances, and meeting with political allies. Every stop on the American Comeback Tour felt like a whirlwind of energy, crowded auditoriums, impassioned speeches, and heated debates that left him both exhilarated and exhausted. For those who watched his rise, it was the culmination of more than a decade of relentless effort. For Charlie himself, it was both a triumph and a reminder that the responsibility he bore was enormous. Even as his influence grew, Kirk remained deeply personal with his students. He greeted chapter leaders by name, remembered details from previous events, and often stayed late to discuss life choices with individuals who sought guidance. One young activist from Pennsylvania recalled him leaning forward, listening intently, asking, "What do you believe in? And what are you willing to fight for?" In these moments, Charlie's presence transcended politics. He became a mentor, a father figure, a voice encouraging purpose. Yet not everyone who followed his life felt admiration. Tyler James Robinson, increasingly isolated and fixated, spent much of 2025 tracking Kirk's movements. His obsession was detailed and methodical. He monitored event announcements, mapped potential vantage points, and researched security procedures online. Court filings later revealed that Robinson's planning included careful notes about distance, line of sight, and crowd density. Everything a young man with no previous criminal record could devise, if consumed by anger and ideology. In his private thoughts, Robinson's writings, later revealed in text messages, suggested he believed his actions were justified. "I had enough of his hatred," one message read. "Some hate can't be negotiated out." His frustration wasn't vague. He fixated on Kirk's influence on young conservatives, the rhetoric he believed was harmful, and the perceived danger of a generation being led astray. Meanwhile, Kirk's life continued in the spotlight. Media appearances, interviews, and debates had become second nature. He maintained the same careful balance that had defined his career, passionate advocacy tempered with a strategic awareness of optics and public perception. In an interview with Fox News, he reflected on his philosophy. "The goal isn't just to argue, it's to inspire, to challenge, to give students tools to think critically." foxnews.com. The spring of 2025 also brought personal reflection. In interviews and private conversations, Kirk expressed concern about the growing polarization in the country. He spoke about the challenges of navigating social media outrage, the need for civil discourse, and the danger of extremism on both sides. Yet, despite these reflections, he never slowed his schedule. Each campus, each speech, each debate was an opportunity to influence young people, to ensure that his message reached the next generation of conservative leaders. As Kirk's momentum grew, so too did the shadow looming over him. Robinson's planning intensified. According to investigators, he had become increasingly isolated, fixated on Kirk's rhetoric, and convinced that action, violent action, was the only way to stop what he saw as harm. He purchased a .30-06 bolt-action rifle, scouted rooftops near planned rallies, and recorded notes that detailed both technical planning and personal justification. In mid-August, a week before the Utah rally, Robinson visited a local range to practice. Prosecutors later described the sessions as meticulous. He tested distances, timing, and wind direction. He wrote notes. "I need to get this right. Timing is everything. One mistake, and it's over." Investigators would later note that Robinson appeared calm, almost detached during these exercises. Meanwhile, Kirk continued his relentless schedule, traveling from Florida to Texas to Ohio in what he called his Prove Me Wrong campus tour. He debated professors, challenged students to question everything, and spoke at length about civic responsibility. In Ohio, a student asked him about his vision for the next decade. Kirk smiled, leaning on the lectern. "The future isn't given to you. You earn it. You shape it. You fight for it, and you defend it. And if you do it right, you leave it better than you found it." Back in Utah, Robinson's planning reached its apex. Court filings indicate he obtained maps, measured distances from rooftops to the expected stage location, and rehearsed his route for escape. Text messages reveal he expressed excitement and fear simultaneously. "It's happening soon. I can't back down now," one message read. On September 10th, as Charlie Kirk arrived at Utah Valley University, the two lives intersected. For Kirk, it was a routine day of mentorship, inspiration, and engagement. For Robinson, it was the day everything he had planned would unfold. Neither could have anticipated how deeply their stories would reverberate across the country. Kirk's speech began with energy, hope, and a vision of collective action. He spoke to hundreds, reminding them that their voices mattered. He reflected on his own life, how a teenager with an op-ed in a local paper could eventually lead a nationwide movement. "You are never too young to have an impact," he said, glancing over the audience with his characteristic intensity. At the same time, Robinson waited above, rifle in hand. The calm he had cultivated over months of planning dissolved into adrenaline, focus, and tension. In a fraction of a moment, the sound of a single shot would irrevocably alter both their lives, the lives of countless supporters, and the national conversation about political violence. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Students ducked and screamed, chairs toppled, security personnel and volunteers tried to shield the crowd. Kirk fell, and paramedics rushed to stabilize him. The once vibrant rally had become a scene of terror. By the time Kirk was transported to the hospital, emergency personnel were coordinating with police. Media crews captured every moment, and social media exploded with shock, grief, and outrage. In the hours that followed, Tyler Robinson was identified, apprehended, and charged with multiple felonies, including aggravated murder and the use of a firearm in a crime of violence. His arrest marked the beginning of a complex legal process, with prosecutors quickly declaring their intention to seek the death penalty due to the premeditated and ideologically motivated nature of the crime. The political world reacted instantly. Conservative media mourned a rising star whose ideas had energized a generation. Liberal outlets highlighted the danger of political extremism and the growing polarization in the United States. Commentary ranged from personal loss to national analysis, and the story dominated headlines for days. Even as grief settled, Kirk's influence persisted. His speeches, writings, and interviews continued to circulate widely online, inspiring debate, reflection, and political engagement. Friends and colleagues remembered him not just as a controversial figure, but as a mentor, a teacher, and someone who believed deeply in the transformative power of youth. The contrast between Kirk's energy, vision, and impact, and Robinson's isolation, obsession, and destructive planning is stark. Chapter 3 of the story, focusing on the final year, highlights the collision of influence and resentment, of public life and private obsession, and sets the stage for the events that would forever mark American political history. Chapter 4: Chaos and Consequence. The morning of September 10th, 2025, began like any other in Provo, Utah. The sun bathed the Utah Valley University campus in soft light, a calm that belied the enormity of what was about to unfold. Students gathered around the large white event tent, chatting eagerly, filming TikTok videos, and rehearsing chants they had prepared for weeks. Some were seasoned TPUSA chapter leaders who had traveled from across the country. Others were first-time attendees drawn by curiosity or the chance to see Charlie Kirk, the man who had inspired a movement. Charlie Kirk arrived at the venue with his usual punctuality. He shook hands with students, laughed with volunteers, and took a brief moment to read notes for his speech. His energy was palpable, a combination of excitement, purpose, and the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years preparing for this very type of engagement. To him, the rally was more than politics. It was mentorship, inspiration, and affirmation of the movement he had built from scratch. Meanwhile, Tyler James Robinson's preparations reached their final stages. Court documents and early reports reveal that he had chosen a vantage point on the rooftop of a nearby building, measuring distance to the stage, assessing sight lines, and practicing with his rifle. Robinson had mapped his plan meticulously, noting crowd density, angles of approach, and potential escape routes. In messages to his roommate, he expressed both anticipation and determination. "It's happening today. I can't back down now," he allegedly wrote. As the rally began, the energy beneath the tent was electric. Kirk stepped onto the stage and greeted the crowd. "This is your generation's moment," he said. "This is your opportunity to stand, to lead, to prove that ideas and action matter." The audience erupted in cheers, waving flags and signs, some recording the event on their phones. The sunlight glinted off cameras, and in that fleeting morning, nothing seemed out of place. Charlie spoke with conviction, weaving personal anecdotes with political philosophy. He spoke of responsibility, free speech, and the importance of civic engagement. He challenged students to consider the consequences of their choices and the legacy they would leave behind. "You have the power to shape the culture, to shape the country," he said. "Use it wisely." The applause rose, a chorus of encouragement echoing across the campus lawn. Then, without warning, the sharp crack of a single gunshot cut through the air. The sound was deafening in its suddenness, breaking the rhythm of the speech and turning excitement into chaos. Students screamed, ducked, and scrambled for cover. Chairs tipped, cameras fell, and phones dropped as the audience tried to understand what had just occurred. Charlie fell to the stage, clutching his neck. In an instant, the scene became one of terror and confusion. Security personnel and volunteers rushed forward, shielding the crowd and attempting to aid him. Emergency medical personnel who had been stationed at the event sprinted toward the stage, weaving through panicked students to provide first aid. The once hopeful rally had transformed into a scene of horror. Within minutes, local law enforcement arrived on the scene. Police officers cordoned off the area, evacuated students, and began a coordinated search of nearby buildings. Helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of the unfolding disaster. Social media erupted, with videos of the shooting and chaotic aftermath spreading rapidly, amplifying the national shock. Tyler Robinson, after the shooting, attempted to leave the scene. Investigators later reported that he discarded his rifle, changed clothes, and tried to hide evidence. His partner was later questioned in court filings, providing critical information that helped law enforcement track Robinson to his location. Charlie Kirk was transported immediately to the hospital. Emergency personnel worked frantically to stabilize him. But despite their efforts, the severity of his injury proved insurmountable. He was pronounced dead later that afternoon, marking the end of a life dedicated to activism, mentorship, and public engagement. News of his death spread rapidly, shocking both supporters and critics alike. The legal response was swift. Tyler Robinson was arrested at his residence and charged with multiple offenses, including aggravated murder, discharge of a firearm, obstruction of justice, and violent crime in the presence of a child. Prosecutors confirmed their intention to seek the death penalty, citing the premeditated nature of the act. Robinson's background became a focus of intense scrutiny. Court documents revealed that he had been increasingly politically active, with a noticeable shift toward left-leaning ideologies, particularly around LGBTQ+ rights. His relationship with his transgender partner, as well as his personal frustrations, were examined for insight into his motives. Public reactions were intense and polarized. In conservative media, Kirk was remembered as a young visionary whose life was tragically cut short. Supporters organized vigils, memorials, and online tributes, celebrating his achievements and reflecting on his impact. In liberal circles, discussions centered on the dangers of political extremism and the alarming consequences of ideological polarization. Newspapers across the country carried front-page stories detailing both the tragedy and its broader societal implications. The TPUSA community was plunged into grief. Chapters across the country held memorial events, encouraging students to reflect on Kirk's teachings and continue his mission of youth engagement. Alumni and mentors spoke of his charisma, mentorship, and unyielding dedication to principles he believed in, painting a portrait of a man whose influence extended far beyond politics. Law enforcement and prosecutors continued building their case against Robinson. Ballistic evidence, surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, and digital communications formed a comprehensive chain linking him to the crime. Investigators emphasized that the planning had been deliberate, methodical, and executed with full awareness of consequences. As news of the arrest circulated, Americans grappled with the implications. Questions of political violence, ideological polarization, and security at public events dominated national discourse. Journalists and commentators explored the tension between free speech and public safety, while politicians on both sides urged calm and reflection. Even in mourning, Kirk's legacy endured. Videos of his speeches circulated widely online. His writings were American could encounter. His life, once defined by personal and ideological curiosity, was now consumed by the consequences of a single devastating act. Court proceedings revealed the depth of his planning, the ideological motivations behind his actions, and the chilling reality that one life could irreversibly impact so many others. Chapter 4, chronicling the chaos and immediate consequences, underscores the collision of public influence, private obsession, and national reflection. Charlie Kirk's final moments, the bravery and panic of those around him, and Tyler Robinson's capture form a turning point, not only in their personal stories, but also in a broader conversation about political engagement, extremism, and the safety of those in the public eye. Chapter 5, Aftermath and Reckoning. In the days following the tragic shooting at Utah Valley University, the nation seemed to pause. The news of Charlie Kirk's death had rippled across every media outlet, dominating headlines and social media feeds. Supporters mourned, critics reflected, and the public grappled with the shocking reality that a prominent young activist, someone who had spent more than a decade shaping the political landscape for conservative youth, was gone. The TPUSA community was among the most visibly affected. Across the country, chapters held candlelight vigils, memorial rallies, and virtual gatherings. Students shared stories of personal mentorship from Kirk, recounting how he had encouraged them to debate, to lead, and to engage thoughtfully with the world around them. Many described him as more than a political figure, a mentor, a guide, and in some cases, a surrogate father figure. Amid the grief, law enforcement and federal investigators worked relentlessly. Surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, ballistic analysis, and digital communications were all compiled to create a comprehensive picture of the event and Tyler Robinson's role in it. Robinson, who had been apprehended immediately following the shooting, remained in custody, facing multiple serious charges, including aggravated murder and the use of a firearm during a crime of violence. Public attention on Robinson grew rapidly as more details of his planning emerged. Court documents revealed meticulous preparation, from practicing with firearms to scouting locations and timing the attack. Text messages and digital correspondence painted a portrait of someone motivated both by personal grievance and ideological opposition to Kirk's beliefs. The nation's political commentators quickly framed the tragedy within a broader conversation about extremism, polarization, and safety for public figures. Conservative media mourned a young leader whose ideas had energized a generation, emphasizing his mentorship and advocacy for youth engagement. Liberal outlets, while condemning Robinson's act, highlighted the dangers of political extremism and the potential consequences of a polarized culture where intense ideological disagreements can escalate into violence. Across social media, hashtags commemorating Kirk's life went viral. Students, alumni, and supporters shared personal memories, favorite speeches, and photographs from TPUSA events. Many recalled Kirk's unique ability to make students feel seen, to challenge them intellectually, and to inspire them to act. The narrative that emerged from these tributes was one of a man who believed deeply in youth, debate, and civic engagement. Meanwhile, Robinson's case proceeded rapidly. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, citing the premeditated and motivated nature of the attack. Public defenders emphasized psychological state, pointing to isolation and intense personal frustration as factors contributing to legal scholars and commentators debated the case extensively, exploring questions of motive, accountability, and the intersection of personal grievance with political ideology. Tyler Robinson's background also became a focus of national attention. His relationships, political leanings, and social connections were scrutinized in detail. Reports indicated that he had become increasingly politically active in the months leading up to the shooting, particularly leaning toward leftist ideologies. Investigators examined these details not to assign blame to an ideology, but to understand the context in which the tragedy had occurred. As the investigation unfolded, questions about security at political events emerged. Universities, public venues, and organizations revisited policies to protect speakers and participants. TPUSA announced plans to enhance safety measures at all future events, balancing the importance of public engagement with the need to prevent similar tragedies. Discussions about political violence, event security, and the responsibilities of public figures dominated national debate. Meanwhile, Kirk's influence continued to resonate. His speeches, social media posts, and writings circulated widely, both in tribute and in many commentators reflected on the paradox of his life. A man whose mission was to inspire debate and civic engagement had been silenced by an act of extreme violence. A stark reminder of the dangers that public figures face in a polarized political climate. The national mourning extended beyond TPUSA. Politicians from across the spectrum issued statements condemning the violence, expressing condolences, and calling for unity. Some reflected on the deeper societal forces that can drive individuals toward extremism, while others emphasized the importance of protecting civil discourse, free speech, and public engagement. Schools and civic organizations held forums to discuss political polarization, mental health, and the responsibility of citizens to engage respectfully, even amid disagreement. In the weeks following the shooting, Robinson's legal team filed motions and began preparing for trial. Prosecutors sought to establish a clear pattern of premeditation, ideological motivation, and planning that culminated in the fatal attack. Robinson remained in custody, facing intense scrutiny and legal pressure as the community sought both accountability and understanding. For many of Kirk's supporters, the tragedy reinforced the importance of his mission. Students recommitted to engagement, chapters expanded activities, and memorial scholarships were created in his honor. Alumni emphasized that while the world had lost a leader, his work and the ideas he championed continued to inspire. The notion of active, thoughtful citizenship became central to their response, reflecting Kirk's enduring vision of youth empowerment. The broader society, too, grappled with complex questions. How should communities balance political discourse with safety? How could public figures navigate ideologically charged environments without fear? What were the warning signs of potential violence, and how could they be addressed? These questions, while unresolved, became part of the national conversation, shaping policy discussions and civic education initiatives. Tyler Robinson's story, intertwined with Kirk's, became a case study in the consequences of isolation, obsession, and ideological fixation. Scholars, journalists, and commentators examined his trajectory, exploring how personal grievances, political ideology, and access to weapons can converge in tragic ways. His trial was closely watched, serving as both a legal and cultural touchstone for discussions about responsibility, accountability, and extremism in modern society. In memorials across the country, speakers emphasized Kirk's legacy of mentorship and youth engagement. They highlighted his dedication to cultivating critical thinking, debate, and active participation in civic life. Students remembered not just his speeches, but his personal interactions, the encouragement, the challenges, the insistence that every voice matters. These remembrances painted a portrait of a man whose influence extended far beyond partisan politics into the hearts and minds of countless young Americans. As the nation reflected on the events, it became clear that the tragedy was not only about one life lost or one individual's actions. It was a reflection of the deep tensions, passions, and responsibilities inherent in public life. The narrative of Charlie Kirk and Tyler Robinson was complex, one of inspiration, mentorship, and societal influence colliding with obsession, grievance, and violence. It forced a reckoning with the realities of polarization, mental health, and the responsibilities of civic engagement. Chapter 5, focused on the aftermath and national reckoning, illustrates the duality of influence and consequence. Kirk's life continued to inspire even in death, while Robinson's actions prompted reflection, investigation, and a legal process designed to balance justice, accountability, and societal understanding. Together, their stories encapsulate a moment in history where public engagement, ideology, and tragedy intersected, leaving a lasting imprint on a generation. Chapter 6: Justice and Legacy. By late 2025, months had passed since the tragic events at Utah Valley University. The nation, though scarred by the violence, had begun to settle into a period of reflection, legal proceedings, and remembrance. Charlie Kirk's absence was deeply felt, but his work and influence continued to ripple across campuses, media outlets, and civic life. His speeches were replayed online, quoted in opinion pieces, and analyzed in classrooms as examples of youth-driven engagement and political advocacy. Meanwhile, Tyler James Robinson awaited trial in a local detention center, facing the gravest charges under Utah law. Court filings, press coverage, and investigative reports painted a vivid picture of the prosecution's case. Robinson had meticulously planned the shooting, obtained a high-powered rifle, scouted vantage points, and prepared contingency plans for escape. The act, prosecutors argued, was not a spontaneous crime of passion. It was premeditated and ideologically motivated. The courtroom became the center of national attention. Reporters from major news outlets lined the corridors, while live feeds brought the proceedings to viewers across the country. Inside the room, Robinson sat silently, often expressionless, while attorneys presented evidence, called witnesses, and debated the intricacies of motive and premeditation. Psychological evaluations were discussed at length, exploring his isolation, obsession, and ideological fixation. Court-appointed experts described him as a young man, consumed by personal grievance and distorted perceptions of political influence. Prosecutors emphasized the meticulous nature of Robinson's planning. Surveillance footage, ballistic tests, and witness statements were cross-referenced to demonstrate the calculated precision of the attack. His social media posts, text messages, and digital notes were introduced as evidence, showing a consistent focus on Charlie Kirk and the perceived harm his influence was causing. The courtroom was tense. The evidence was overwhelming, painting a picture of deliberate action and ideological obsession. The defense attempted to provide context, highlighting Robinson's personal struggles, isolation, and psychological challenges. They argued that while the act was tragic, it reflected a young individual's disconnection from reality and inability to process ideological differences constructively. Ultimately, the trial became a study in contrasts, the vibrancy, mentorship, and national influence of Charlie Kirk versus the isolation, obsession, and destructive fixation of Tyler Robinson. Outside the courthouse, public discourse reflected the nation's broader reckoning. Vigils and memorials for Kirk continued, honoring his work and the lives he had inspired. Students who had attended the Utah rally spoke publicly about their experiences, emphasizing the impact he had on their personal development and political engagement. Many remembered his ability to challenge them thoughtfully, to encourage debate, and to cultivate a sense of responsibility in shaping their communities. At the same time, scholars, journalists, and commentators analyzed the cultural implications of the tragedy. Questions arose about political polarization, the role of social media in amplifying ideological conflict, and the warning signs of potential violence. Educational institutions, civic organizations, and policymakers considered changes to event security, mental health support, and public engagement strategies in response to the shooting. The trial progressed steadily, with the prosecution presenting a compelling case that emphasized premeditation, motive, and consequence. The defense countered with arguments about Robinson's psychological state and lack of prior violent behavior. Witnesses testified about both the immediate impact of the shooting and the broader influence of Kirk's life on students and colleagues. For the jury, the evidence was complex, emotionally charged, and deeply personal for many of those connected to the events. Ultimately, the verdict was delivered after weeks of testimony, deliberation, and reflection. Tyler Robinson was found guilty on all major counts, including aggravated murder and the use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime. The sentencing phase was deliberate and solemn, reflecting the gravity of the crime, Robinson's age, and the societal need for justice. Utah's legal system imposed a sentence designed to hold him accountable while ensuring that the tragic events of September 10, 2025, would be remembered with clarity and solemnity. For those who had been closest to Charlie Kirk, the verdict brought a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at the legal resolution was tempered by enduring grief and the recognition that no sentence could restore the life that had been taken. Friends, colleagues, and students reflected on his impact, sharing stories of mentorship, inspiration, and dedication that went beyond politics. They emphasized that his life, though tragically cut short, had ignited a spark in thousands of young Americans, a spark that would continue to grow. Nationally, the story became emblematic of the dangers of political polarization and ideological extremism. Conversations in media, classrooms, and public forums centered on how individuals might be influenced by rhetoric, social media, and peer pressure. Civic organizations revisited programs to teach critical thinking, empathy, and respectful engagement, aiming to reduce the likelihood of similar tragedies in the future. Charlie Kirk's legacy, in death, became a lesson in both inspiration and caution. His life demonstrated the power of youth engagement, debate, and civic responsibility. Students and activists across the country continued to organize events, scholarships, and programs in his name. Social media campaigns emphasized not only his public work, but also his personal mentorship, capturing moments in which he challenged individuals to think, question, and act with integrity. Meanwhile, Tyler Robinson's story was studied as a cautionary tale. Psychologists, legal experts, and educators explored how obsession, isolation, and ideological fixation can escalate into acts of violence. His trajectory was examined in schools, universities, and legal training programs as a warning that unchecked grievance and extreme isolation can have devastating consequences, particularly when combined with access to lethal weapons. In reflecting on the broader impact, many noted the duality of the narrative. Charlie Kirk's life represented the constructive power of engagement, mentorship, and purpose-driven action. Tyler Robinson's actions, by contrast, demonstrated the destructive potential of obsession, isolation, and ideological polarization. Together, these intertwined stories formed a complex portrait of contemporary American life, illustrating both hope and vulnerability, inspiration and tragedy. In the weeks and months that followed, communities continued to memorialize Kirk. Annual scholarships were established, encouraging students to pursue civic engagement, debate, and leadership. TPUSA chapters commemorated his mentorship, emphasizing the values he had taught: debate, responsibility, and active participation in society. His speeches were studied as examples of persuasive communication, his public appearances analyzed for rhetorical mastery, and his personal interactions remembered for their warmth, guidance, and inspiration. Charlie Kirk's life, cut short, left an indelible mark on a generation of students, activists, and young Americans. Tyler Robinson's actions and the subsequent legal reckoning underscored the importance of accountability, societal reflection, and the responsibility of communities to address isolation, grievance, and ideological polarization. The legacy of Charlie Kirk is multifaceted. It is a story of inspiration, mentorship, and youth engagement. It is also a story of the fragility of life, the dangers of extremism, and the importance of understanding the human factors behind acts of violence. In remembering his life, the nation confronts both grief and hope, the tragedy of his loss, and the enduring influence of his vision. As courtrooms emptied, memorials concluded, and media coverage shifted, one truth remained: Charlie Kirk's voice, ideas, and mentorship continued to shape countless lives. From lecture halls to student leadership programs, from podcasts to social media discussions, his influence endured. Even in death, his mission persisted. A reminder that one person, through dedication, vision, and engagement, can leave a lasting impact that reaches far beyond their own life.